Get Rich Education is brought to you by International Coffee Farms. Own your very own parcel of a Panama coffee farm today.
Welcome to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, giving you information and ideas on the investment that has turned more ordinary people into millionaires and billionaires than anything else, and can provide you with more wealth and happiness than you ever thought possible. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, and educator, Keith Weinhold.
You're listening to Get Rich Education, Show 31. I'm your host and my name is Keith Weinhold. Welcome in. By being here, you've greatly increased the chances that you will change the polarity of your financial circumstances. How is anything less than a 25% annual rate of return from income real estate disappointing? We're going to break that down today and a lot more. It really helps to know this stuff, and I'm grateful that you're willing to help yourself out. It's even more important now when many feel that the stock market is too high to possibly buy low. Get Rich Education is a free education with material that you can act on that's going to have a real impact in your life. It's a great value. This is a worthwhile education. Well, someone might ask you, Get Rich Education, okay, so you get your learning from a free podcast. Well, yeah, and you might wonder what their question is trying to validate. Well, what about college education? Yeah, I happen to have one of those myself. But the value of a college education is going down while the cost of a college education is going up. Very few, if any, college classes really teach you about multiplying your money, and that includes economics classes. You need to know about financial concepts that are going to have a real impact in your life. Concepts like leverage, arbitrage, cash flow, cap rate, velocity of money, and all approached with that mindset of abundance rather than scarcity. College courses don't transform your life in 7 months, and this show has for an increasing number of people, especially those that have listened right from episode 1. College student loan debt is one of the few debts that can never be written off in any type of bankruptcy, folks. In the United States, you cannot default on your student loan debt. It doesn't matter what chapter of bankruptcy one files for. And yeah, this is all for an asset whose value has gone down, but the price has gone up, and it's gone up even faster than the rate of inflation in recent years. Now, I'm not saying don't go to college. I'm saying put its value in perspective. Okay, so to understand anything well, you need to look at it from different perspectives. A fish in water cannot see the water. Just because all of your friends are going to college, that's not enough reason in itself for you to go too. You know what? The chances are increasing that those friends of yours that went to college will be your tenants. Yeah, millennials have an increasing propensity to want to rent for all kinds of reasons, and that's led by the fact that they're saddled with high student loan debt. Yeah, the debt is higher than ever because that cost of a college education is greater than ever. And their debt also remains high because, like I said, the value of a college education has gone down. A college degree just doesn't stand out, so they can't get a job with an income high enough to pay down those student loans. That's a real financial headwind for millennial college graduates. Well, these are dynamics that lead to a decline in the rate of home ownership. All right, well, is that good for you? Well, it depends on what side you're on, and I want to put you on the right side of that. If you're buying rental property, the fact that home ownership is more difficult for millennials, well, that's really good for you. Those millennials cannot afford a down payment, and still difficult lending standards on a home and all the ongoing maintenance expenses that they would have keeps them renters, and they stay renters for a long time. How much does this matter? Consider that as an age cohort, which is age 18 to 34 for millennials, that there are more millennials than baby boomers. There are already more than 75 million millennials. There's already more than the baby boomers, and the millennials numbers just continue to grow as more people age into that cohort, 18 to 34, than age out of it. Millennials are a more transient cohort too. They move around a lot. That further contributes to a demand to want to rent rather than buy. Millennials are also a group that is postponing marriage and household formation, and that's just another factor that's more likely to keep a renter. The percentage of U.S. households that own a home has dropped in the last 5 years. There are more renters now. Over the last 10 years, the percent of renters in the U.S. has climbed from 31% up to 35 to 36% today. That's really good news if you're an income property investor. Although interest rates continue to defy gravity near these historic lows here, which many think could continue for a while, it is difficult to qualify for real estate loans today, as the pendulum has swung far away from the easy money days 10 years ago in the mid-2000s, and it's stayed here for a few years now. So, staying with the "a fish in water cannot see the water" analogy, isn't it ironic? Paradoxical, really, that the most durable, stable investment asset class that makes more people wealthy than anything else, real estate, is all around us every day, and yet so few people know of its power. Here's what I mean. That 10-plex apartment building that you drive past 250 times per year, that could be the property that sets you free. That could be the property which, by the time you add it to your portfolio, can tip you over the top so that you can declare your financial independence day. It could be right in plain sight on your everyday commute right now. Isn't it ironic that the investment of real estate is something that you and all of your friends and family are interacting with right now at this very moment where you're listening to this podcast? You are interacting with real estate right now, whether you're driving on a highway, washing dishes in the kitchen, sitting in an office, running on the treadmill, bicycling on a trail. You are driving demand for real estate right now, and I too am right here where I sit. Your occupying of real estate helps secure income streams in some way for somebody because you're occupying that right now. You're contributing to an income stream for either a bank or a landlord or a taxing jurisdiction at this moment right now. Now that is an asset with sustainable demand. I want to put you on the right side of that transaction, not the wrong side. I want to put you on the side where the income flows to you, not from you. Outside of the human occupancy component, when you buy a rental single-family home or an apartment building, you own tangible commodities too. They have some value. You now own and control valuable components in the property like glass, steel, wood, concrete, copper wire, bricks. And you also effectively own a share of the cost of the labor that went into turning those raw materials into usable, functional household components. And here's the thing, whether you have 5% equity in the property or you own it outright free and clear, you still have the same amount of control over those things. As you accumulate more properties and cash flow in your portfolio, you might have some family and friends that ask you why you're buying turnkey real estate property outside your home market. Well, not that you need to validate it, but here's why we're doing all this. And this is sort of like a little GRE game reset here, okay? No one gets wealthy just working for money. We all know that. That's not where we want to be, okay? Well, here's what fewer people know. Almost no one gets wealthy getting their money to work for them either. Creating wealth that is lasting, substantial, and life-enhancing, well, that's obtained when other people's money works for you. That's a foreign concept to those whom you're talking to about this for the first time. They're like, using other people's money to acquire wealth? A common reaction to that is, well, how do you do that? Is that legal? And even if it's legal, would it be ethical? Yeah, it's both. Using other people's money doesn't even mean that you're exploiting people. In fact, it's just the opposite. When you provide them with housing that's clean, safe, affordable, and functional, you're providing others with great value. And in a sense, that right there really iterates the basis of this show and the basis of my purpose. Now, how do you ethically use other people's money? Well, with income property, you do it three ways at the same time. Number one, you use the tenant's money for both rent income and passive cash flow, also known as making money follow you, and you benefit from it for loan principal paydown as well. Number two, you use the bank's money to both increase your leverage and put the risk on the bank. That leverage is powerful. That is whether you put just a 5% down payment on a property or a 50% down payment on a property, that property's value is going to change regardless of that equity position. Historically, real estate rises in value over time, so with a lower down payment, your rate of return is greater with a lesser down payment. Number three is you make other people's money work for you because the government provides you with great tax incentives when you provide housing for others. Those significant benefits are both the mortgage interest deduction and tax depreciation. When we had Rich Dad Advisor Tom Will right here on the show, he told us that the amount of tax that serious real estate investors should be paying is exactly zero, okay? Personally, I had several $100,000 of rental income last year, okay? Property managers report that rental income on 1099 forms for your taxes, and they send them out at the end of the year. My effective tax rate was low, and my tax obligation was zero. In fact, I received a tax refund for last year, despite having several 1099 forms sent to me with six-figure rent income on them. Now, how do I say that 25 to 30% annual rates of return are common with just a modest amount of education in this income real estate where loans are used? Well, numbers don't really work that great in audio form, so I'm going to provide a lean down version, okay? What you do is you add up your sources of income property wealth accumulation to come up with 25 to 30% or more. All right, of the 5 ways that investors financially benefit with real estate, we'll just add up the big 3 ways. The last 2 get too numbers heavy. Now, if you bear with the example on the first of these 3, then you'll have it because the next 2 are mathematically easier, okay? So income source number 1 is appreciation. Now, appreciation is not something we can just count on, but historically, real estate appreciates over time at about 5 to 6% a year. We'll just call it 5, okay? Now, here we go. With a $20,000 down payment on a $100,000 property, that property is worth $105,000 after the first year. That 5% gain or $5,000 gain, that's a 25% return on your $20,000 down. Okay? How did you achieve that 25% gain right off the bat? That's because you achieved that return on both the $20,000 down payment and the $80,000 borrowed from the bank. Okay? So to that 25%, add in the income that we get from number 2. Now, number 2 is our return from the tenant rent income, creating cash flow, which is leftover money every month after all the expenses are paid. That often results in a 10% return when you run the numbers and make comparisons and make your selection that way. So in this example, that's if you created $2,000 of cash flow in 1 year on that $20,000 down payment. That's 10%. That's called the cash on cash return portion, okay? So following along here, we're now up to a 35% rate of return, 25% for the leverage appreciation, plus 10% from the tenant cash flow. We'll add that 35% rate of return now to number 3. Number 3 is loan principal paydown. At today's low interest rates, the amount of the principal paydown that the tenant makes that first year is often 4 or 5% of the amount of your down payment. All right, just call that 4% that we're adding to the 35%, and we have a 39% total rate of return. Okay, the 4th way you're paid is through tax advantages, which are personalized to your scenario. And then finally, the 5th way you're paid is through inflation hedging, which is to your benefit, but that's harder to measure. All right, so a 39% rate of return. That's why they say that landlords get wealthy in their sleep. And of course, you don't want to be the landlord. I think the better way to say that is that real estate investors get wealthy in their sleep. Now, with the 39% total return on investment above, to keep things simple, we haven't added in any closing costs. I usually get the seller to pay those for me anyway. And we also didn't even include those two significant investor tax benefits, which are more difficult to quantify, like tax depreciation and the mortgage interest deduction, which basically means that we get to keep more of that 39% return. And then we didn't include the inflation hedging benefits in that number either. So a 39% total rate of return, and that's using a few conservative numbers. If we had used a 6% appreciation rate rather than 5%, that would be a 45% total rate of return on your investment rather than 39%. Now, every few years, one should look at harvesting and redeploying accumulated equity. Otherwise, the amount that you have invested in the property grows from equity buildup, and that's a drag on your total rate of return. That's diluted because you do now have more money invested. But that's how it works, folks. You really don't even need to be that smart to figure this out. I mean, talk about how doing the right thing is more important than doing things right. I mean, knowing about this is the right thing. And, there are also very few nations in the world outside the United States that offer financing terms at low interest rates where you can lock up both the term and the rate for 30 years. That's more than an entire human generation of principal and interest certainty. And that's a payment that's never going to increase in value over time, while your income does rise with inflation. I mean, look, even in Canada, it's not like this. Look at what Canada has, okay? I go to international real estate events and talk to Canadian investors. The standard mortgage in Canada, that's not the 30-year fixed like it is in the US, but a 5-year mortgage amortized over 25 years. That means the loan balance has to be refinanced at the end of 5 years, exposing the borrower to any increase in rates that has occurred in the interim. You have a shorter 25-year amortization, it's more difficult to make things cash flow. In Canada, there are also steep prepayment penalties for borrowers that are hoping to exploit a decline in rates. So in that declining rate environment, you often can't hope to refinance out and into the lower rate. You have to wait until the 5 years are up and then just hope that you catch interest rates near a low. Oh, and mortgage loan interest is not deductible in Canada either. In the United States, it typically is. Hey, well, why choose residential real estate over other types? And when interest rates rise, what's going to happen to the value of your real estate? And what's going to happen to the amount of rent income that you can generate? You're listening to Get Rich Education. Through Get Rich Education and International Coffee Farms, you can own your own half-acre parcels of a passive income-generating coffee farm in Panama for as little as $12,000. It's a low-risk opportunity with an average annual return projected to be 13 to 15%. The farms are professionally managed for you on a turnkey basis, and you own the land. And you can give as well as receive by helping International Coffee Farms create good jobs that pay a living wage and provide medical, pension, and other benefits to very poor Panamanian coffee farm workers and their families, often for the first time in their lives.
This is Entrepreneur on Fire's John Lee Dumas. Don't follow money, make money follow you with Get Rich Education.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education. All right, so recently the Fed has hinted that they might increase the federal funds rate later this year. Now, mortgage rates aren't directly correlated to that rate, but they do soon follow behind. And mortgage interest rates have got to increase sometime, okay? We all know that. They really can't go any lower. And they just haven't bounced up very much from their lows ever since the Fed flattened its target rate to zero back in late 2008. Higher mortgage interest rates can stifle real estate price appreciation for sure. They make it more difficult for values to increase. I think that most people understand that, but first, no listener left behind. Here's what I mean. A $300,000 property at a 4% mortgage interest rate is easier to afford than if rates rise to 6%. At 6%, fewer buyers can afford that higher monthly payment. Well, with less demand for property at this higher interest rate, price support starts to go away, and the $300,000 home could very well be worth $290K the following year. So rates are an important factor, but they're only one of many constantly moving factors up and down in real estate price movement. I've heard people oversimplify before and just go on to say that, housing prices have got to go down when the mortgage interest rates rise. No, that's not necessarily true, okay? Let's look at some of these other factors, all right? Remember, mortgage interest rates are national, real estate is local, so factors other than rates are going to continue to affect the price too, like local supply and demand, local population increase or loss, local employment growth or contraction. Another moving factor is the construction cost to build suitable replacement properties locally. There's also what I'll call business sector factors too, okay? Like, for example, what if you're in a major oil-producing metro like Houston, Texas, and the price of a barrel of oil goes way up or way down? Here's another scenario. What if your employment is just stable and steady, but yet within that steady employment, the incomes rise in a certain area? That can contribute to resultant price increases in real estate, even if interest rates do move higher. Higher incomes support higher real estate prices and higher rents. And in the United States, real estate prices are often about 3 times annual incomes, okay? That 3-to-1 ratio is highly affordable real estate on a global basis. So let's just look at the ratios in some other countries, okay? South Africa is one of the very few somewhat better developed nations that has a similar 3-to-1 ratio. In Canada, the price to income ratio is 5.5-to-1, okay, meaning housing is less affordable in Canada. Over in Australia, home prices have just continued to relentlessly increase year after year after year at a 9% annual clip, such that the price to income ratio there is now pushing up to 7-to-1. And my Australian real estate investor friend, he is no longer buying in his home country. He's only buying outside his home country because no one buys in Australia for cash flow anymore. They're all just speculating on more appreciation. In most European countries, including Scandinavia, the price-to-income ratio is between 6-to-1 and 10-to-1. In Italy, it's 12-to-1, okay? Really unaffordable. So, the bottom line here is that if you're a U.S. resident, you can build your passive income real estate empire here more easily than maybe anywhere else in the world, and most Americans aren't even taking advantage of this. So, incomes are just another one of all kinds of factors contributing to real estate values. Mortgage rates do matter. They're just one of so many factors that are simultaneously moving around. Now, last decade, when housing values rose pretty quickly, some renters started having these discussions at home. They were like, hey, honey, let's get into a home and go buy before we miss out, all right? Renters started fearing a sense of loss. They wanted to buy a home before its affordability slipped away, and they continued to see it rise in value, all right? Renters wanted to capture that appreciation momentum. Now, this decade, with rising home values, a lot of times it's more difficult for a renter to get into a first-time home because the loan qualification process is so much more stringent than when values were rising a decade ago. So just having sufficient down payment money and being able to afford monthly mortgage payments, that's not necessarily enough for a renter to be able to move out and buy a first-time home. Now lenders are actually verifying that you have adequate reserves, documented income, meet a certain debt-to-income ratio threshold, have a better credit score. That's why a lot of renters need to stay renters now. All right, now most agree that mortgage interest rates will rise before these stringent loan qualification standards ease. Well, if that becomes true, soon you could have even more renters unable to get out and become home buyers because now you've got qualification standards that are already tough, and that could be coupled alongside higher monthly mortgage payments due to higher interest rates. So, really a greater question for the income property investor like you is, how much do values matter and how much do rent incomes matter? So, as you can see, real estate values can rise in a higher interest rate environment depending on what's happening with all these factors. All right, so what about rent income? I mean, that's the key don't follow money, make money follow you factor. Well, with higher interest rates, meaning that renters are more likely to stay renters because they can't qualify with those higher monthly home payments, that puts upward pressure on rents because there's more demand for rent. Now notice, even if appreciation on your rental property slowed down or even reversed and your income real estate lost value, you got to ask, how much would that really matter if your rent income is higher than ever, driven by that higher rental demand, since even fewer renters can qualify to move out and get their own home loans? Here's what I mean. If you own a fourplex and it's now worth less than what you bought it for, say you've got a fourplex worth $280K and you bought it a couple years earlier for $300K. Well, if you're getting paid more tenant rent income every month and you're in a positive cash flow position, then you got to ask yourself, how much of a liability is it really to hold onto the property that's temporarily worth less than what I paid for it? The fourplex wouldn't be a liability at all as long as you don't need to sell it. And why would you want to sell it when your cash flowing income is greater than ever before? Now, you wouldn't have adequate equity to refinance either, but you'd likely have no incentive to, because we're looking at a future scenario where interest rates are potentially higher and you wouldn't even want to refinance into them anyway because you would be at a lower rate already. So with income property, as long as you're careful with market selection, you can kind of be hedged both ways. I owned rental real estate units in 2004 and 2005, and even though real estate prices had been surging for years, hey, I did lose some renters that went off to buy first-time home buyer condos. That's because it was so easy to qualify for loans then. Sometimes borrowers didn't even need to document their income to get a loan, plus interest rates fell down to 6% and then down to 5%. Well, that enticed renters to move out of my fourplex as their first-time homeowner condo became affordable. Home price values had been surging for years then, and renters moving out felt like they were putting a stop to their opportunity cost of not owning anything. Renters were trying to capture some of that appreciation momentum. Well, I was not getting rent price increases for a couple years there, but I had bought in a market where there was sufficient job growth in the area, so I was able to keep the units pretty well occupied. At the same time, I was experiencing significant increases in the value of my rental real estate. So I was benefiting from that same appreciation momentum that renters were fleeing to go capture. So buy in the right market. That's the big lesson there. That's why we focus on market demographics so much here at GRE. You don't want to be in a position where you're in a market with job losses or longer-term anemic rental demand where you have to end up making all kinds of concessions to renters, or even worse, have long vacancies. I mean, that's when you see landlords doing things almost desperately trying to attract tenants by dangling things in front of them, like sign a 12-month lease and get a free month's rent with it. That's when owners start saying things like, rent from me and you can bring in your boa constrictor and your snapping turtle and your iguana and your oversized dogs. I just need to rent it out, We hedge against that here by choosing markets selectively, and I only bring providers onto the show that represent good markets. So when you do, you potentially can hedge yourself both ways, no matter which way these dynamics turn over time. For mortgage rate news and charts, my favorite source is mortgagenewsdaily.com. That's in the show notes. Now, one last thing to hit on here. Why do we focus on residential real estate more than other types like office or retail or industrial? For one thing, it's easier for investors to get into residential real estate, and it's easier to get financing. It's also kind of easier to understand. Most people can relate to paying rent to live somewhere because they've done it. Well, few have paid to lease land in a building to operate an auto body shop or a coffee shack. So it's easy to make a case that while some real estate types are becoming less important in society today, residential real estate is becoming more important. Look, in the past 10 to 15 years, you've already seen certain retail stores fall out of favor, go totally bankrupt, or undergo mass employee layoffs like Blockbuster video stores, Kmart, Radio Shack, Best Buy, Macy's, JCPenney, Borders bookstores. What's the one thing that they all have in common? Consumers are circumventing the need to go there because now they can do more shopping from home. Habits now have consumers downloading Netflix movies onto their TVs, iPads, and mobile devices. That's why Blockbuster's gone. Now, consumers today compare electronic device features from home and then buy from home as the internet functionality has matured, and that's cut into Radio Shack and Best Buy. You already know all that stuff, but just think about how it actually supports residential rental demand. And it's not just shopping from home, it's working from home that's also making residential more important and more valuable to people. Now you've got all these advances in cloud computing and video conferencing. It makes home-based business more viable so that people can work from home more too. Residential real estate is becoming more important, and it's likely going to continue. This maturing of 3D printing and drones are just two more developing technologies that promise to make residential an even more vital real estate type. So, the trend is your friend here. Hey, well, on the next show, we're going to talk about these future technologies and what they mean to real estate. We're also going to explore the most valuable real estate known to humankind, and yet no one is even monetizing it. On GRE, I've talked about cultivating an abundance mindset, and I'm trying to help you think bigger. But maybe you've wondered who my influencers are in helping me think bigger. Well, you're going to meet one of them because he's our guest on the next show, and he's one of the boldest thinkers and doers in the world today. So, hey, I treasure that you listen to Get Rich Education. This week, please tell a friend about the show. Now go out there and don't quit your daydream.
You've been listening to the Get Rich Education podcast, telling you what the wealthy won't tell you about real estate and investing. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to visit iTunes and leave your comments.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.